At the Global Liver Institute, we believe it all starts with a patient. So what happens when a patient, a liver patient no less, one of the 500 million people living with conditions that often go undiagnosed, untreated, or misdiagnosed, mistreated, and stigmatized, brings the challenges of liver patients front and center? And what happens when a patient then leads a discussion with world experts in policy, research, clinical care, and wellness on ways to overcome these challenges? Let's find out today on GLI Live. Hello and welcome. My name is Donna Cryer. I am the founder and CEO of the Global Liver Institute, and I have the privilege of being your host for this Rare Liver Diseases Month episode of GLI Live. Today, we will be discussing racial disparities in research around rare liver diseases. And I have two fantastic guests to help us explore this topic. I have with me Dr. Teneasha Washington of the Washington Group, and soon to be Dr. Veronica Williams, who is a board member of our good friends at the Autoimmune Hepatitis Association. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. So as if you're listening, if you're watching this, as opposed to just listening to it, you see I have once again reached into the closet, into the archives, and brought out some stripes for Rare Diseases Month. If you don't know the origin of using stripes and talking about looking for zebras rather than horses when you're looking to diagnose rare diseases, that is a fun story, and you can find more about it if you follow the hashtag #RareAware. I'll say that again just to be clear. RareAware is the hashtag that we're using this month as we lead up to Rare Diseases Day on February 28th. But it should come as no shock that we decided to take the entire month for our discussion on rare liver diseases. And that month, and hopefully by this point, you have engaged in a host of activities featuring stories of fantastic young people, extraordinary young people living with rare diseases, our patient-focused drug development meeting, we have policy briefings, we have words of the day, we have a lot of ways that people can connect with stories and issues around rare liver diseases. And to me, this is one of the most important issues, making sure that everyone who has a rare liver disease has the opportunity to be diagnosed, as I was, and to linked to high quality care. So, Dr. Washington, why don't we start with you and tell us about your connection to this space and really exciting initiatives like RareX, which sounds like very cutting edge.
Yeah. So awesome. Happy to be here. Thank you all for having me. And by the way, you can call me Tanisha. You don't have to call me Dr. Washington.
Thank you.
And I think so. My background in the field is really more so from a community perspective, and really thinking through when I first got into the rare disease space. They were like, hey, Tanisha, we really want you to look at our registry. Our registry seems to be, we're trying our best. But when we analyze the data, what it shows is white affluent women that have children with rare diseases. And that's what the data was saying. And they just knew there were others out there that didn't necessarily fall into that category. So I was brought in to kind of look at the data, think through just mechanisms and ways to engage communities that you don't fall into the cracks of not having a very diverse sample. So that was how I started. And then now, over time, it has come into this space, which I'm very excited about, because I know when I first started, it was not very diverse. And some would argue that it still isn't diverse. And I would be one of those. But I would say that a lot of my work now stems from that diverse perspective and identifying ways. And that's with RareX, identifying ways to engage people again from a diverse perspective, rather than kind of what, we're used to in the rare disease space. And one thing that they're actively working on is creating this platform that allows anybody and everyone to put their data in. So as we know that therapeutics and all of those things that are necessary for this particular population can be done expeditiously rather than how, we've seen it in some smaller rare disease populations.
And what are the days? Oh, sorry. Having a little feedback today. I always say that I invite feedback, but not during an episode, not from technology. What are the dangers of not having diversity in registries and in clinical databases and other areas?
That's a great question. And I always started off from an economic perspective because I think, of course, all of us know the benefits, the anecdotal benefits of having a diverse perspective about many things. But I think we have to train our minds to think economically. And my background is in public health. So oftentimes when we're sitting with legislators, we have to come from that economic perspective. So I would say, and I always start off by saying that we do know that the demographics of the United States specifically is changing very rapidly. To the extent that by about 2045, I think they say, or 2040, the population will have shifted where people that we think of as the majority will no longer be the majority. And if that is the case, if we are continuing to crunch numbers and have platforms and data that consist of just the majority population, that data is not going to be relevant to us in another 10, 15 years. So to state that case, and I think that when people hear it that way, it's not that, it's an ask that you be more diverse. It's actually a necessity so that we can continue to foster great research in this area.
Thank you so much. Veronica, tell us your story and your connection to rare liver diseases.
Thank you. I appreciate being here today with you all. So in 2001, I began to feel ill. I just attributed it to being in college, working a lot. My mom encouraged me to go to the emergency room because she noticed that my skin was turning yellow, my eyes were turning yellow. Went to the emergency room, done a plethora of tests, and then that's when the doctor came to me and said, your liver enzymes were elevated. Not knowing what that meant. My mother didn't know what that meant either. So I immediately got admitted for 2 weeks into the hospital. But during that time, the doctor came into the room and said to my mom, I need you to go to your daughter's house and clean out her medicine cabinet because we think she's on drugs. Taken aback by that, people who know me know I've never been on drugs. So 10 years had eventually passed. Doctors were treating the symptoms. I went to various centers, Cleveland Clinic, Strong Memorial, just to see what was wrong with me. No one knew. I finally moved to the Midwest, where a friend of mine, her father was living with cancer, and they recommended that I go to the IU in Indianapolis, the medical center, to get treatment, to see a doctor. And I was literally 3 weeks away from liver failure when I finally got diagnosed, like over a decade later.
So clearly, there were multiple stigmas and biases at play that delayed your diagnosis and linkage to appropriate care. So how does your work with the Autoimmune Hepatitis Association help to start to address some of those barriers? Because I know so that's certainly part of my motivation, to make sure that no one else has to go through all the things that I've gone through to get a diagnosis or to get the appropriate care, that it's, easier for the next family that comes behind me. And so how does some of your work relieve some of the barriers that you experienced in your diagnostic journey?
First of all, I didn't know it was a rare disease. I didn't know anything about it. So I was invited to take part in one of the conferences that AIH had developed. And that was the first time that I seen other people with the disease. But what I recognized was there were no other people who looked like me at that conference. And anybody who knows me knows that I am a 99% extrovert. and I will always speak my truth, regardless of who it is. So, the Autoimmune Hepatitis Association has helped me be mindful of the doctors that I speak with, and how I speak with those doctors. So I tell all the doctors, do I need to educate you on my disease? Because usually they don't know, what autoimmune hepatitis, and I have to say, it's not a letter. There's no letters associated with it. So it's my work with the association. I'm passionate about patient advocacy, because I am very vocal about how people treat me, a lot of other patients don't have that opportunity to do that when they go to their doctor's office.
Right. I answer the question the same way when asked, why do you, work yourself up? Why do you, push so hard? Why do you take these stances? I'm like, because others can't, and if it's this hard for me, then it's so much harder for someone who doesn't have my background, education, experience with the disease or with healthcare. So if I can't fix it here while I'm here with this doctor or this healthcare system or this payer or whatever, then it's not going to be fixed when somebody with less resources comes behind me. So I do feel that responsibility and that privilege as well, to be able to do that work. And it's so important. Many people talk about patient education as if just educating us is sufficient. But if we don't have the physician education and the health system education and processes, then you can have the most activated, engaged patient in the world, and it still won't work. So I think that's a really important point that you've brought out. So Tanisha, you're involved in a lot of wonderful research projects, and I was laughing as the team was putting things together to describe this research. I was like, I know what pruritus means. I know what biomarkers means, but let's break this down for our audience. There's a lot of research into why people with cholestatic liver diseases itch so bad. Not a normal itch, like a devastating itch, like please somebody knock me out type of itch, and an itch that interferes with life, with sleep, with just being, called pruritus. So can you talk to us about some of the research that's going into finding treatments and hopefully cures for that symptom that beleaguers so many of us with a variety of pediatric and rare liver diseases?
And I'll try to keep it on a broad base as well. Again, from a community perspective, thinking about just you actually mentioned a lot of these. I think there's research in multiple areas. So of course, there's genetic research that's happening. But I think more importantly, the research that's happening around biases and all of those things that happen as you're, going to a physician's office, even the idea of access to care, and sure that people's access to care, that they're not just accessing care, Veronica, in your situation, but that they're in situations where they have quality care. So they are in the process of even looking at pain factors and through how, from the perspective of minorities, how even physicians, if you come with that pain and you say, hey, I'm having this itch, or I'm having this or that going on where I can't sit down for, a long period of time, what they're realizing is that even from a biased perspective from physicians, specifically people of color, they feel like they can handle more pain, or they can handle more of the symptoms of whatever you're speaking to. So if I'm itching more, or if I am saying, hey, this is very painful for me. In Veronica's situation, which I think is key, hey, this is happening to me. You can see clear distinctions of a physician being able to say, like, hey, this is obviously something going on with the liver. But switching that to, hey, go clean out, a drug cabinet. that is bias. And, you know, I feel like, you know, there are definitely practical things that are happening on the biometric scale, but I think it's more meaningful for patients to understand that these things are not happening. You are not the person that is the problem in a lot of these situations. The idea is that there's just bias in the healthcare field. And once we can address those biases and how people talk about their pain or how people can relate to certain symptoms and things that are happening to them, so that health professionals recognize that, hey, this is happening, and it's happening exactly as they say, and we should be able to treat it the way that they are describing it. So I feel like there are so many areas, and I'll go back to the RareX platform. I'm talking about kind of how important this is. So the platform and being a part of these different registries where you can put in that data and you can talk about those symptoms and all of the things that are happening to you. And I always say, yes, this is a rare disease space. However, if you add up all of the rare diseases, they're not that rare as a whole, you know? So if we look at things from the sense of a higher level of, hey, let's include everyone, and being able to, again, put everybody's data into a platform, because who knows, liver conditions may be affiliated with some other condition that we just don't know yet. So I think that that's where it comes down to these, hey, let's actively use these platforms. Let's actively identify researchers that can work through that, a diverse selection of researchers these problems that are happening, real life problems that we can find real life solutions for, rather than, you know, again, educating your physician, which has to happen. It's typically, oh, you know, patients need so much education, but we've all been to a physician's office and you can talk to a physician for 5 minutes, which is typically how long you speak with them. And I remember one told me that I was obese. And I said to her, yeah, it was just a yearly appointment. And I said to her, you know, you really need to check your bias, because you know that the BMI scale was not adapted for people that are people of color. So your definition of what that would be, I mean, she said it politely as much as she could, but your definition of what that looks like from a BMI scale is not going to be conducive to me, a woman of color, considering what you base that data off of. So I want to take it there and kind of say that that's where I kind of stand into that space and make sure that that's
you know, and I want to underscore that for people listening who could take that as just, oh, you know, Black people don't want to hear when they're overweight. It's a real scientific thing. We also know that for Asian Americans, for example, they will get diabetes and in some liver diseases, fatty liver disease, for example, at a lower BMI. And so, you know, it's beyond cultural or, you know, what we like to look at, or the fact that we think, you know, thick is beautiful, and it is. But they are real scientific differences, as well as racial, ethnic, and cultural differences that need to be reflected in how care is delivered. So I just want to underscore what you were saying, and how can physicians be better at the cultural competency, that where can they go to learn how to do this well? Because if we're thinking about the intersection of rare diseases and under the panoply of liver diseases, and then to recognize that there are people of color who have rare liver diseases, that they often didn't learn about that possibility in medical school. Their textbooks didn't show us in the rare liver disease category pictures. And so how can they learn to more positively and productively interact with their patients of color, so they don't misdiagnose these, or so that they can have conversations that do lead to people wanting to submit, you know, biological samples to registries, which takes a lot of trust to do, that do want to participate in clinical trials, which takes a lot of trust and persistence to do. And so starting with Tanisha and then Veronica, if you'd like to talk about that, trust building and cultural competency, growth pathway.
Yeah, I think, and I want to go back. So when I mentioned data platforms, from my understanding, that's what it should be. The whole idea of trust. And I knew we would have this question, so I waited to talk about this because this is probably one of the things that I see a lot of, that I have a concern with. A lot of different organizations and just things in general when it comes down to trust in people of color. First, I think that there has to be acknowledgement that there are biases. The acknowledgement that, what, even I have biases. So acknowledging that, and then also talking about the history. Because I think people forget, we ask people, hey, put your information in a platform or put your information over here in a registry. But it's so important that we speak to the history behind why people do not want to do those things. So especially people of color, and this is not just Black Americans. There are plenty of different just examples of how people of color have been ostracized and participated in projects, misleading projects that really took away that trust. So I always say that, we have to be very understanding and really hit it right there and say, look, the system in America has been wrong when it comes to research and how we started the efforts of research. And as a researcher, I have to be able to admit that as well. So I think that's very important, acknowledging that and also talking about how that has changed. So what are the requirements now? You can't, I'm sure it can happen in a very small whole, but you don't run research the way that we used to run it 20, 30, 40 years ago. So speaking to how those things have changed, those processes have changed, that you can have a better understanding of the process and how you hopefully will not be in a situation like that. But I think more importantly, and this is one thing that I always stress, it's about the partnership and it's about engagement. You cannot expect people to participate in things just as a buzzword or a buzz. Hey, this is a marketing, scheme to have you participate. You have to actively engage with community members. And I do not understand, I do understand it in some point. We don't have to talk about that. But the idea that it is so hard for people to come to the conclusion that every time you have a meeting with someone, it doesn't have to include an ask. It can include a, hey, how's your day? How's your organization going? What resources do you need? Rather than an ask of, hey, I need you to do something. So I think in that sense of really building strategic collaborations with organizations, and more importantly, I tell my students all the time, at the end of our work every day, one thing that you cannot forget is we do this for people, not data. We do this for people. And if you always keep the people thought at the beginning, you will always do great work because it's about people, not numbers. And I know Veronica has a lot to say, so I won't take up all the
so much. I'm over here applauding you because
exactly
about this answer. Everything you said, I was like, yes, that's what I think too. But no, I'm like, so what I think is, doctors need to show empathy towards our healthcare concerns. Listen to us. Be willing to educate themselves so we can educate ourselves. And most importantly, I say people need to not mute our voice. We have a voice in our care. I also wrote that they need to acknowledge and empathize with our past struggles related to our hesitancy. There is a reason. Show us that you care about us, not only through, publication articles, through your intentions, through your actions. Recognize that we are in this community and we need the care that we deserve.
I think that there are also questions that we can ask of our research partners as they demonstrate their trustworthiness. So I always say, if you want trust, well, then be trustworthy. And here are some things that you can demonstrate with us. I mean, I think it's fantastic that Veronica is on the board of her association. I'm on the board of mine. I'm on the board of my hospital. And so who is in decision-making authority? Who is part of the governance structure of research projects? Is there a patient or community advisory board who looks at these questions, who looks at the approach, who looks at the budgets? Is there money set aside for community outreach? So there are questions that we can ask to really allow someone to show that they have put thought and effort in being, authentically a partner in research for the long term. How is data going to be returned to the community? In what form? And things like that. So I think that there are efforts such as the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition, which was created under the auspices of the Black Women's Health Imperative, with so many different diverse organizations, medical societies, patient advocacy organizations, come together to set out patient education, research standards and opportunities, and physician and education, and from medical education on through continuing education and researcher education. And so that's a resource that we will absolutely put into the show notes for this. I think that this is everyone's responsibility, or at least everyone has a role that they can take in terms of improving the diversity in clinical trials and in clinical research, so that we can get the care that we need, not only in rare liver diseases, but in common ones. It's, African Americans represent only 5% of clinical trial participants, even though we're 12% or so of the population. And in that gap is potentially the next cure for a rare liver disease. In that gap is, the next therapy, or in that gap is the next great process for how to conduct research, or how to design a trial. And so I see such hope in an opportunity in closing that gap. What would you like to leave our listeners thinking with? Please activate us for the rest of Rare Liver Disease Month and the rest of the year. I'll go to Veronica first, and then end with Tanisha. Charge our viewers with something. Lay them down a challenge.
I just wanted to reiterate something that Tanisha said that I always been thinking about, is people need to acknowledge, first of all, their implicit bias related to our medical needs. Recognize that you can't tell someone living with a rare disease but you can't tell by just looking at them, but you can listen to us and listen to our needs to help us get better.
Awesome. Tanisha?
Yeah.
For viewers.
My challenge is that we all remember what we do our work for. And I go back to my sentiment for my students, the idea that we do this work for people and not numbers, and I think when we change our perspectives of what that means, from a physician standpoint, especially, recognizing that oftentimes all of these other things that we get credit for, most importantly, our work should revolve around making sure that we do great work for people.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So to everyone, you can be both rare aware and racially aware. They are not only both good, they are necessary. And I look forward to talking with you on the next episode. Thank you so much to both of my guests.
Please be sure to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. Join us weekly on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time for more episodes of GLI Live. Check out our website, globalliver.org, and follow us on social media to learn more about the Global Liver Institute and stay up to date with the latest in liver health. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and stay